giving. I cannot preach in the sense I've never preached on giving because I always feel embarrassed, and I don't like when pastors preach about giving, and it's just like I always think as this kind of a marketing technique and all that kind of stuff. So I said, no, I'm not going to preach it, but I'm going to preach it to myself. So so this is a sermon I thought I will never preach it to anybody but myself. But last week it was right here, and I thought, maybe there are no coincidences if you know faith life. And so maybe this is the time we have to speak about it. And so the disclaimers, second disclaimer is that nobody asked me to preach on giving. Pastor Wilson or Pastor Thomas or your secretary or treasurer, they have never asked me to preach on anything. So if you have a problem with this, it's all on me, okay? So I've never been asked to preach on this or any. But when you read that scripture, right, like, John chapter 3:16, there are two parts to that scripture, part A and part B. So part A is actually written from God's perspective, and part B is written from our perspective, okay? We like that verse mainly for part B, because part B is where it says, so that we will not perish and we will have everlasting life. That's what made that verse so popular. It's a golden verse, right? From our perspective, it's about salvation. But part A, from God's perspective, it simply is this. So I'm going to say that verse just like this, and I'm going to stop at part A. This is what it says. For God so loved the world that he gave. Okay? That's it. Nothing else. Part B is for us. From God's perspective, it is about giving. Right? For God so loved the world that he gave. That he gave. Now, have you ever been in a predicament where you love a person so much so that you are not even sure how you can express that love for that person, right? And if you're married and every birthday of your spouse, this is a predicament you are going to face, right? You don't care about your birthday, right? Like, who cares? ICA cares. They sing a song or something. But you're always worried about how you express your love for your spouse. And if you are not married, and if you are in a relationship, and you probably don't want to tell anybody in ICA, but you know that you always wonder, what would be the best way I can express that love, right? So it's interesting, Pastor was talking about Barna survey, and I recently read a survey, and I can't figure it out when I read it, so I can't give you the reference. So they were interviewing couple and also those who are dating, and how do you express, how do you know that your significant other is loving you? How do you recognize that the other person is, truly has love for you? So some people said, well, it depends on how much time he or she spent. Time is very important. And some people say, I like flowers, like gifts, and it doesn't matter how much time the person spent, but I like flowers because if he really knows that I like flowers and he gives me that, then that is a token and all that kind of stuff. But the majority, I think it's around 60 to 70% of the people said the best way a person, the best way that they identify that their significant other loves is when they go on a date, the other person picks up the check, right? And you can say, all I love you, you can give flowers and you can give time, you can go for movies, but it really matters is that does he pick up the check? It's mainly women who said that, right? So, that made me thinking, right? Because giving is the most tangible expression of loving, right? Because we live in a Western culture, and Western culture, something I really like about the Western culture is that, Western culture is unapologetic about expressing their feelings and passion, right? Every husband and wives, here they say, oh, love you, honey. Even if they fight, they say, love you, honey. And you tell your children, I love you. I do that too. That's something I copied proudly from this culture. And I say that to my wife when I call her, on the phone, or, and when kids go to school, I say, Hannah, I love you, and Emma, I love you. And it's important that we vocally, we express that I love. Sometimes it is important. In some of our culture, it's not that common. It's something we can learn. But having said that, my father or my mother have never, ever said that to me. My father has never, my mother have never said, they both have never said that they love me. Because that's not part of who they are. But to this day, not even for a single second, I've ever doubted that my father loves me. Because even though he doesn't say it, every single action from him has unequivocally proved that he loves me. Right? He is around 87 or something, and he is literally bankrupt in the sense that he wrote off all his property. It's not like we have a lot of property or anything, but every single thing he had, he wrote in my name because I'm his son and I'm supposed to take care of. So if I say, get out of the house, and he literally has no bank account in the sense that he has no saving, he has nowhere to go because he completely trusts me. So even though he has never said, I love you, my son, with every fiber of my being that I know he loves me because he gave. He gave. He gave. Giving is the most tangible expression of loving. Giving is the best physical demonstration of loving. And when you are in ministry, and this has happened to me, when I started off as a young minister a while ago, when you go to these different churches and when you speak and people say, oh, Pastor Mathew, we love you. Oh, what an amazing sermon. And then when you're young, you get carried away. Oh, man, everybody loves me. Everybody loves me. And, people, you get carried away. You're just a human being, right? Like you're just a human being. When people appreciate you, we all have that craving. But eventually I realized that all these people, not all these people, a lot of it is words, right? People get excited when they hear a great sermon or they're part of an excellent worship service. When they go home, they forget it. They don't necessarily physically express that all the time. And it's funny, when we moved to Pasadena, I have a lot of such examples, but when we moved to Pasadena, I had a friend, I don't know if I can call him friend. He was a man in his 70s. He's a German. And he met me in one of the churches I was preaching, and he really liked my sermon. He would ask me to go for lunch with him. So probably once in a month we would meet at a very nice restaurant, a Chinese buffet, like around $25, $30 for a buffet. He will always pay for it, and we'll just have very nice conversation. And so we have this friendship between him and I. And just before we left for Pasadena, and he was asking, so how are you, so you're going to America. So you're not an American. How are you going to live there? I said, well, God provides. Heinz, that's his name, Heinz. And then he said, yeah, but you don't have a visa. You cannot work there, right? I know I cannot work there, but God will provide. But then he said, well, so what about Fuller? Do you have any scholarship or anything? Well, they have not really confirmed, but I'm sure God will provide. And after a while, he got so tired. He's a German. The Germans they are very matter of fact. He just got angry. I kept saying God will provide, and he's a Christian too, and he knows God will provide, but sometimes he can be so vague. Then he said, Matthew, I'm going to ask this question very specifically. Everybody in the room was looking at it because he just raised his voice. I'm asking you, how are you going to buy milk for your children? That's my question. Because he put it in a specific context, right? So I didn't know what to say. I said, all I can say is that I knew that God will provide, right? Then I said, well, then he asked, yeah, it's great to know that God will provide, but don't you think that God will provide through people like us? Then I said, yeah, that's the way God normally provides. Then he asked, why didn't you ever tell me about this? Why didn't you ask me? I've been meeting with you for a year, and I am a businessman, and you never said that you have a need. And I thought you're from because we used to live in a very rich neighborhood, somewhat like a Beverly Hills. People always thought that I have $1 million. That's the way we always conducted ourselves. So he was, the reason I'm saying is, he was so offended, I always worry that you will offend by asking people. But this is the first time I offended somebody by not asking. And he was so angry that he said, you did not ask me because you never considered me your true friend. If you thought I was your true friend, you would have asked me. Then I don't know what to say. Everybody in the room, because he talks very loudly, and he's in his 70s. He doesn't care about what other people think, right? Anyway, and so that was our conversation. And the next week, I get a check, and he sends a check for $5,000. And I never asked him, but he sent this $5,000 check, and that was actually one of the little cash we had when we moved to Pasadena. But actually, that particular incident, and Heinz actually, the way he conducted himself, the way he expressed himself. Sometimes we say we love you, but it has to have a tangible demonstration. It has to make sense, right? And that's what he did. And Heinz, after that, every year, he will send $1,000 to our charity, our ministry back in Canada. I've never taken that money, but, he will send it to our ministry. And last year, Heinz passed away. And I was, I know where he's going, not that I was particularly sad, but I miss him. And then I told Joanne, okay, there goes that $1,000, because every year our ministry would, we don't get a lot of money from, as you probably have figured out by now, I'm a very bad fundraiser. That's why Pastor has never asked me to preach on giving, because normally I'm not very good at that, right? So I said, oh, there goes that $1,000. Not, I just said it in a very funny way. But this year, beginning, we get from Heinz' family $2,000. So I called and his daughter, and I've never really, she knows who I am, and I know who she is. I never had a conversation. She's a young woman, not that young, but mid-30s or so. And she said, Matthew, I appreciate you meant a lot to my father, and I want to continue giving to your ministry. Whether you take it or not, doesn't matter. And that's the way I honor my dad, because I have noticed from my dad that he had a particular affection for you. And so instead of $1,000, she doubled it to $2,000. The reason I'm saying is that, I really felt loved. Not for $1,000 and $2,000. And, don't think that I'm measuring love by money. But sometimes it is the tangible expression of loving is giving, right? When I was a kid, I always used to ask my dad, Dad, we say God is this omnipotent and all-powerful. He owns everything in this world. And so why should we put money in the church, right? Like if God don't you want, especially when you're a kid, you wonder about it. So my dad will always say, yeah, but the church still has to pay the bills, right? And we used to attend a Jacobites. It's a Syrian Orthodox church. It's a 2,000 families in the parish, like a Gothic cathedral, so somebody has to pay the bill. And so God doesn't want anything but for the church, we are giving, right? Then when we became evangelical, I would ask my pastor, why do we need to give all the money? Because the evangelicals don't have churches and all that, big churches, small churches. Then the pastors would say, Matthew, it's because we want to do ministry. We want to help other people. These are all not wrong answers, but they are not the correct answer. Theologically speaking, we are not giving because we want to do so and so things, and because we want to spend it on good causes. We are giving because it's part of a disposition in us. The giving is not just an action. See, giving is not just an action. It is a disposition. It is who we are. It is coming from us. It is like, the word love. Loving and giving should go together. Wherever you see love in the Bible, I say replace it with give. That's what you learn from John 3:16, part A, right? God so loved the world that he gave, right? So love is both a noun and a verb, right? Both a noun and a verb. Just by expressing love, the actions of love, you don't necessarily become love. It has to stem from the disposition, right? The very being. It has to become our nature. So we are not just giving something, but we are giving from within ourselves, because we give because we love. Because that's the best way we can express that. We can pick up that tab. Not just by saying, I love you, which is important. Not just by giving flowers, which is important. Not just by giving gift, important. But giving is the best physical demonstration of loving. And God is really challenging me to do that. And that's why sometimes people ask me, Pastor Mathew, we know that it's not tithe, is not necessarily a New Testament. So when should I start giving tithe? I just became a believer. Should I wait till baptism to give tithe? And, or should I wait till I get my first job because I don't have a job? And so should I give? And then the answer is very simple. Because when in New Testament, tithe, forget tithing. Giving is not something you start. Giving is something you have to stop when God is asking. For example, giving is the default position. The moment you love, the moment you start giving. And you have to give until God asks you to stop. Right? Because that's the love, the question is not when to start giving. The question is, Pastor Mathew, when should I stop giving? Not when should I start giving, when should I stop giving? Because, I'm going to go become bankrupt the way I am going to express the love. Does that make sense? Because loving, if you truly love God, giving becomes the default position. We don't start giving. That's why I said giving it becomes a disposition. It becomes our nature. And it's the same thing too, and people ask me, how much should I give? Okay, so it's not tithe. And we know that, and I don't have to explain this. But, how much should I give? That, again, the answer is very simple. God so loved the world that he gave. It's that loving is giving. So Santosh, our worship leader, one of those songs he sang a couple of weeks ago, I really like that song. I'm listening it again and again. It's called The Reckless Love of God. And it says that, I don't want to sing it. Even today I was reminded that I should not be singing in public. So, by someone. But it says, it goes something like, it's overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. That's the verse. The verse of the song. So the answer to your question, how much you give, you should be overwhelming, never-ending, reckless giving. That's what giving is. Because that's what John chapter 3:16 teaches us. God so loved the world that he gave. Never-ending, overwhelming, reckless giving. That is exactly what God did. So don't ask me for a number. Don't ask me for a percentage. And that's your answer right there. You're singing every Sunday, right? Now, the second thing we can learn from this is, giving is not a means to an end. It is an end in itself. I'll explain what that means. See, for example, one of the interesting things about this verse, God so loved the world that he gave to, who did God give to? To the world, right? Because God loved the world, so God gave to the world. So God didn't give to, like, heaven. That's where he lives. That's his territory. That's his area, right? But he gave this gift to a strange, alienated, different place than where he was. And I'll explain what I mean. So let me read Romans chapter 5, verse 6 to 8, okay? This is what it says, Romans chapter 5, 6 to 8. For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man someone would dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. This is one of the most paradoxical, ironic statement. It says, God gave for the ungodly. God did not give for the godly. That's what he should have done, right? Logically. But God gave for the ungodly. Now that is a big challenge for many of us. And this is, if you ask me, something which really separates secular charities from Christian charities. If you go to secular charities, Bill Gates and, or some of these Hollywood stars give much more than ICA could give in the next 20, 30 years because they have that much money, right? Billions and billions of dollars. But if you ask them, if you go and plead them for a case, even if it's not a Christian case, even if it is a good case, they will not necessarily invest their money because they are all championing a cause. Some people are passionate about AIDS, and some people are passionate about, environmental causes. Some people about poverty in Africa or all this kind of stuff. But so when you go to them for something completely unrelated to their cause, even though it's a good cause, they will not give. And I know, I've been in this field for a while, and I'm sure, and some of you can identify, because they are so overwhelmed, because they are so focused on their cause. Even though they are giving, they are not exactly giving, they are promoting a cause which they believe is good, and it is charitable. I'm not questioning their motivation, but yet there is a selfishness to that act. And it can become very legalistic too. And sometimes some Christian foundations do that too. And I'm sure people who are in the fundraising business, they have this agenda. Some foundations will support ministries only to Africa. So you have this big issue in India, or I don't know, even in America, we badly need money, but the foundation, they go, sorry, we can help you because it is written very clearly, it's legally obliged not to give for any cause other than that particular cause. And you will be surprised, really? We thought these are charitable. They are charitable, but they are promoting. They are not just givers. They are giving to something. The giving is not just, giving is a means to an end. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? They are giving for a particular cause for that end. But Jesus challenges us to give for the sake of giving itself. That's why I said the giving it's not a means to an end, it has to become an end in itself. Sometimes Christians do too, right? And this is a question I always get. Is there anywhere it is written that our tithe has to be paid to the local church? Now, this is always a complicated question, right? Does the Bible say you have to pay your tithe only to the local churches? And all the pastors, including myself, will insist that, yes, you have to pay to the local church, right? That kind of makes sense. Now, that is true, and I believe that is true. But sometimes there is an element of manipulation when we see that, particularly in the Western world. For example, I know a church. No, I don't want to say about that church, but I used to work in a church, for example, in Toronto, a very nice church. And when I went to that church, I was the second in command. So we had a senior pastor, then I was the associate pastor, then all the other pastors will report to me, and then I'll report to the senior pastor. That was the function. So I was in charge of everything. So I was going through this electricity bill. I was way high, the electricity bill. So I said, why do we have this problem? So I started, particularly because of my electrical background, and I'm very keen on the electricity, saving electricity. So I realized that, this is Toronto, as you know, it's very cold out there, right? So they have a very nice facility in downtown Toronto, like the heart of Toronto. And so the sanctuary is used only once a week. That's all they use. Sunday for worship, that's the only time they use. But they keep the sanctuary heating 24/7. Now in Toronto, it's always cold, minus whatever, right? And I said, why do you have to keep heating this place? You only use it on Sunday, right? Like, why don't you just start heating on Saturday evening, and so that Sunday morning everything will be warm and fuzzy, whatever that is, right? So then they said, well, because we have a piano sitting there in the sanctuary, and that they cannot move that piano. If the temperature affects, that will affect the piano, and then that will affect the tuning. I said, who cares about the piano? Who reads piano? Who plays piano nowadays, right? Like you have keyboard and all that. No, we cannot touch it. We cannot touch it because it is given by an important person. It's a church possession. I worked there for 3 years. I was unsuccessful in reducing the electricity bill because this place was just getting heat up just for a piano, right? The reason I'm saying it, this is just a sample of, I know a church which pays $20,000 a month on electricity bill. Now, the reason is, well, of course we need facility. Of course these are expenses important. But you have to remember, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, in the first century, when people paid tithe to the church, that really means the churches in the first century was like mission organization. And I would say, to contextualize it, was more like IGO than ICA. Or I would say it is a blend of IGO and ICA. Because when you go to the Church of Corinth, right? If you go to Church of Corinth and you pay your tithe, and the pastor comes and take the money, and he doesn't pay electricity bill with that because they don't even have a facility. And they don't pay salary with that. I mean, of course, salaries are important. I'm not questioning any of this. But all these expenses, they were actually doing the ministry which mission organizations like IGO was doing. That's what the first century church was doing, mission organization. Parachurch, what the parachurch is doing today, that's what the churches were doing in the first century. What World Vision was doing, what IGO was doing, or what Compassion International was doing. But today, it has come to a stage what the church is doing is maintaining a facility. And then they say, you have to bring your tithe to the church. Obviously, you had to bring the tithe because they had to pay this electricity bill and they had to keep heating up the piano. Of course, you had to give that money. And then they say, then you have money, then you can give to other missions, whatever IGO or whichever ministry, if you want to give, See, that's why I said even though technically it is right to say you have to give the tithe to the local church, you have to actually give tithe to where the ministry is happening, and it better be your local church. Right? That's why when we pray for a building, have you noticed the language we use? We pray for a church. No, we pray for a ministry center. Now, that's very different from praying for a church. And if you are praying for a church, I will not put my hand here and pray. I'll pray because I'm a pastor. I have to pray for everything. But I put my hand here and pray because we don't pray for a church. We don't pray for money to heat up a piano, right? We pray for a ministry center where buildings are important, electricity bills are important, salaries are important, but something is happening on a 24/7, at least 9 to 5 basis. There has to be ministry happening. Then it makes sense for you to give to your local church. Then it makes sense for... So that's why I said, even though theologically it is right when you say give to the local church, what I read the local church in that context meant completely different from what we think a local church today is. Right? So that is very, very much. The point I'm trying to make is sometimes we also get caught up in this circle. Even though we say, oh, we give to the Lord, very often we are not giving to the Lord. Do you know that? And I have this experience working in this, in the Western, I still remember when we were doing a fundraising for a church. It's very difficult to get its mission, and you had to preach a lot. But I still remember we decided to go for our nursery. We had a very nice nursery in this church I was working for in Toronto. We wanted to have heated floor for the kids to just have the heated floor because floor gets cold, right? In a weekend we raised money and more than enough because parents gave, and they thought they were giving to the Lord. They were not giving to the Lord. You must be kidding me. They were giving to their kids, because they wanted their kids to have heated floor. And they thought they gave to the Lord. Does that make sense? So very often, I know that very often we give to the church, we give to the local church, so we need to have a children's pastor so that they can babysit our children. We need to have a youth pastor because they can take our kids to some good youth movies so that we don't have to worry about teaching them all this. We basically outsource our job to these people, and we want to pay salary. It's a good thing you to pay salary to all these children's ministers, all the ministers. I'm not saying anything about that, but don't be kidding yourself. You are not giving to the Lord. You are giving to a cause which is going to indirectly benefit you, and you thought give to the Lord. You didn't. You didn't. Because you were using it, giving as a means to an end, but not an end itself. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's be very clear about that. So, it's the parable of, one of the parables Jesus said was always a challenging thing to me when he comes back, the parable of the sheep and the goat, right? On the one side, the sheep, and the other side, the goat. And to the sheep, he said, when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was in prison, you came and saw me. Remember what is their response immediately? They said, what? When? We didn't know. We didn't give it to you. Because they had no idea they were doing all these things because it was in their disposition. They were not using it as a means to an end. They were not even giving to the Lord because that's the only thing they know. Giving became a part of it. They are essentially saying that we had no clue that we were giving to you. See? Because there was no selfishness in their giving at all. We give, if it is to the Lord, we have to give to the Lord so that God can bless us and God can, because we are obliged to give. No, they were completely clueless that they were giving to the Lord. That was their first word. Lord, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you naked? No, you don't remember. That's not the intention of giving at all. We gave because that's the only thing we know. We gave because we love. Loving is in our very being. Loving has become a disposition, so is giving. And the last thing I wanted to say is, God so loved the world that he gave what? His own son, which is another way of saying himself, right? Jesus is God himself. So God so loved the world that he gave himself. See, God could have given so many things to us, right? He has a lot of stuff, right? All riches and all treasure. And so he didn't give us what he has. He gave us who he is. I'm going to say that one more time. He didn't give us what he has. He gave us who he is. See, very often we think that we can get away by giving things to the Lord. Giving the things we have. Here, Lord, this is my salary, 10th, or I'm going to give you 20%, or I'm going to give you 30%. I'm going to give you everything, but this is what I have. But the Lord says that, no, I don't want what you have. I want who you are. There is another, the book of Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 5, where Paul is appreciating the gifts received from the church of Macedonia. Right? This is what Paul says. They first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. They first gave themselves. That's the best gift. If you give yourself, then the rest of things, you won't ask questions like, what percentage should I give? When should I start giving? And who should I give? These questions come because we don't give ourselves. Our love doesn't come from our giving doesn't come from our love. That's why we are concerned about all these questions. But the church of Macedonia gave themselves first, and the rest of it flow from who they are. I had a friend who was an anthropologist, and he was saying that his son said, I don't want to be an anthropologist like you. I want to be a philanthropist. And he probably, because he thought philanthropist is like a job, right? Like, you study anthropology and you become an anthropologist. Like so he thought you study philanthropy, which is the art of giving, right? And then you become a philanthropist. He thought that sounded cool. Then he said, son, that's not how you become a philanthropist. Not everybody can become a philanthropist. You have to be Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. You have to make a lot of money so that then, actually there are people like that. There are people who are professional philanthropists, because they have this billions of dollars of asset, and their job is to make sure that they are giving it to the right people at the right time. And so that's their job. That's a really nice job to have. And I pray that I will have that job one day, so that I have so many billions of dollars, and I'm racking, my head, what should I do? How can I give it out? So they are professional philanthropists. We may never become like that, because philanthropists give what they have. But we can become better than philanthropists. That is by giving who we are. So let's go to the Lord, right? Let's go to the Lord. And I ask you to close your eyes for a minute. And I know, I have no access to your giving or anything, and I know you're good givers, and that's what I always hear from the pastor. And so it's not about, when the offertory plate comes and write a big check. That's not what I'm talking about at all. And I want us to have a different disposition. I want us to have a different look at the art of giving. And I want you to give because you love. You love the Lord, you love the church, and you love everybody around us. So because of that, you cannot stop giving. The more you give, the more you become like God, because God is the ultimate giver. The more you give, the more you become like God. So I'm not asking you to give, and I want you to be a giver. That's a big difference. I'm not asking you to just give. I want you to be a giver. You give from what you have, but when you give yourself to the Lord, when you give from who you are, you become a giver. So God did not just give. God became a giver. And I want to repeat that. The more you give, the more you become like God. That's why you give. You want to become more like God. That's why you give. Not because church needs a ministry center. Not because we need a children's minister or we need this and that. You give because you want to become more like God. You are giving because it is in your disposition. You are giving because of who you are. You are giving because you have become a giver. Just like the God who so loved the world that he gave.